This podcast is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle.
Hi, this is Joan Hilson, CFO of Signet Jewelers, and I'm here with the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 802.
In some cases, we're reading the literature, staying up on what's happening scientifically in different fields, and we see something interesting, and we'll reach out to them and say, "This looks really interesting. Would you consider partnering with us to advance this?" In most cases, they're open to it, but they typically will want a lot more money than will work for our business model. So we're always looking for things that are quote unquote affordable for us to bring in and reasonable for us to bring in. We don't want to acquire a program that then takes away resources from everything else we're trying to do.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Mike Catelani, CFO of Anixa Biosciences. It was nearly 17 years ago that Mike Catelani got a call from a recruiter who would ultimately land him a biotech CFO role. At the time, Catelani was CFO of a manufacturer of instruments and tools used in drug discovery. However, opportunities inside the actual biotech realm had to date remained beyond the reach of his resume. Meanwhile, the recruiter saw something he liked. Catelani's company was traded on the ASX, the Australian Securities Exchange, and ASX experience topped the list of prerequisites one of the recruiter's biotech clients was now requiring for its next CFO. Suddenly, Catelani's resume enjoyed some added luster, and the door to the biotech realm swung open. Our talk with CFO Mike Catelani begins after this. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility, because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/CFOpod. Head to netsuite.com/CFOpod for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/CFOpod. We're speaking with Mike Catelani, CFO of Anixa Biosciences. Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me here.
So, Mike, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us and sharing with us just a few of the experiences that they feel prepared them for a finance leadership role. Tell us about what those experiences were for you.
Sure. Thanks. I think there's probably three primary areas of experiences that impacted where I am today, I guess, and how it prepared me. One was exposure to a lot of different kinds of businesses early in my career. Another was experience of a lot of different management styles, and another was learning the importance of cash. Talk about each one of those a little bit. So I started my career in public accounting at the Sacramento office of Ernst & Young. Actually, to date myself a little bit, it was Arthur Young when I started. I was there when it became Ernst & Young. So you can do the math on that. So
that would be
realized,
late 80s. Yeah.
Yes, it was late 80s. I believe the merger was in 89 or 90 maybe, but I started there in 88, just so we're all clear on how old I am. The thing that I realized early on as an auditor was that auditing really wasn't for me. It just, the work itself, I didn't really enjoy. But what I found that I truly enjoyed was every few weeks going out and meeting a new client and learning about their business. For me, that was just so huge. We were a small office in Sacramento, and most of our clients were small. I didn't have a lot of government clients, as you would imagine in a state capital, many government clients. I actually didn't have any. I think I helped out on one government contract, but other than that, it was all small companies, and it was really fun to see what all these different companies did. I had clients that were professional sports, ski areas, biotech, telecom, retail, financial institutions, defense contractors, a gold mine, food processing, on and on. Just a ton of different kinds of businesses. And what I just really enjoyed learning how each one of these companies worked. I was just, naive, I guess, at that age coming into it and just not realizing how many things were out there. And, it was just exciting to learn about operationally, strategically, what these companies did, how they made money or didn't make money, but how they tried to be successful and what they were trying to do. And it really broadened my view as to what, being a finance professional was. I was an accounting major in college. I just thought accounting was what you did and every company does it. And, it's really important. And I realized that there's so much more to the why behind why we're doing the accounting or the finance, and what these companies did were just huge to me.
You mentioned how you love getting in to understand the clients and how their businesses operated, but the auditing part, after a while, I guess, took its toll on you. It wasn't exciting you enough. And we hear that frequently. You were there 4 years though. And how much, when you think back to that 4 years, roughly, were you on the client site most of the time, a fraction of the time? How did it work exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to kind of go back to the memory banks, but my recollection was that, I was almost always at the client. There was maybe, what was it? There was a term for it, on the beach. That's what they used to call it. So when you weren't assigned to a client, you're in the office, helping out somebody else who might need somebody to do something for their client. But for the most part, yeah, you're almost always there. I think I had a desk that was always mine, but for the most part, I barely sat at it. We're almost always at the client site.
Was that 2 months, 6 months? What would that be?
For most small companies, the audits are pretty short. So you could be there for anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. I mean, 6 weeks was actually kind of a long audit, if I recall. Again, these are small companies, most of them. So the audits go pretty quickly. I know of auditors that basically spend their whole time auditing one company kind of year round, and that's what they do. We didn't have clients like that in that office. They were all much smaller companies. So, usually it was just a few weeks at a time.
And I know we're going to get to this, but I just want to, you didn't mention any biotech companies, and I know that's a later chapter perhaps in your resume. But am I right about that? So far, even at Ernst & Young, not too much exposure to biotech?
Yeah, there was one client I had that was biotech, but not in the traditional sense. It was actually agribiotech. So GMO before that was an acronym people used. And so it was a client that was in the agricultural business, and they were genetically modifying plants for agricultural usage. And I did, that was a client I had, but not healthcare biotech.
Well, I interrupted you a few questions there, but please continue.
No problem. The other thing I was mentioning was management styles. So I think it's important to note, and it kind of fits in with my earlier comments about the smaller clients. I've spent my entire career, other than Ernst & Young, in very small companies. That's, I think maybe because of the exposure to the small companies as an auditor, I liked small companies. I liked companies where you could make a more direct impact. And so what I found in small companies, especially, is management style has an outsized impact on everything. If you're a company of 50 people and the CEO likes to scream all the time, that has a huge impact on everybody in the company. And so, I've worked at some companies where, and I'm not going to name names, but I worked at some companies where, management style was all about screaming, yelling. Human error was completely unacceptable. One little mistake, and you're berated in front of half the company. And those companies were driven, hard charging, and were successful. But what happens is the success isn't really felt by everybody. You don't feel good about the success. Morale's low, turnover's high. When the company has successes, yeah, that's great. Am I going to get a bonus? That's all I care about. And so it just made it for kind of a unhappy situation for everybody. And then I worked at companies where it's complete opposite type of management style, where it's more about, being nurturing and helping people grow and being okay with, hey, mistakes happen. We're all human. So how do we deal with it? Not, you screwed up. It's, how do we solve the problem that you created? But how do we solve it? Let's move forward. Let's learn from it. And in those kind of environments, I really found that, when the company was successful, everybody felt like they won, regardless of compensation, regardless of where you sat in the org chart. Those were team wins. And, when there were failures, because, companies have setbacks, it wasn't the end of the world. Everybody, felt like, oh, we got to do better next time. Let's work together. And just the ability to create strong teams, I just realized was so important. And, as an auditor, when you're not working in a traditional work setting, it's a different audit team every time you go to a client, they're different people. So you don't have a traditional boss, and there isn't, the dynamics are different all the time. And so I had not really been exposed to that, how important management style was. And you kind of think, well, just work and get your work done and move on. Because as an auditor, you're working with a bunch of people that are just like you. So you don't really have to think much about how to motivate people, because we're all the same. You work in industry and you realize that, there's all kinds of different people. You can't yell at the AP clerk to stay late because she's got to pick up her kid after school. Well, when I was an auditor, nobody was picking up their kids after school. That's not what you did. You worked, 80 hours a week. And so you learn that, not everybody's like you, and you have to, really adapt your management style to make sure that, everybody's happy. I mean, they spend so much time at work, it's not just trying to, get throughput. It's about making sure people are enjoying where they're spending the bulk of their day every day. And so that was really important. I think the last thing I was mentioning was the importance of cash. It's kind of a no-brainer. Obviously, cash is important, but early in my career, the first company I worked at after I left public accounting was a venture-backed pre-revenue company. Actually, I think we had a little bit of revenue, but the point is we were not profitable. We weren't cash flow positive. And, I learned so many lessons about how important it is to manage cash. And no matter how big the company gets, no matter how successful it is, you've always got to manage the cash. And I think the three things I learned from that was, there's no such thing as too much cash. Dilution will not put you out of business, but lack of cash will. And never spend like you've got a ton of cash, no matter how much you actually do have. Just always manage it carefully. And it's important because whether you're public or private, you just can't count on easy availability of cash. I mean, look at the markets today. A year and a half ago, it was easy to raise money in biotech. Now, biotech, it's really tough place to be right now.
Struck me that you're right. Many people who right out of college get into an enterprise corporate environment might stay there for 5 or 6 years, might be enlightened when they first change jobs to realize that not everybody has the same management style. Sort of one of the benefits of auditing, you get to walk into all types of mid-market clients and get an eyeful of how people operate, like you just described. Curious about when you do leave Ernst & Young, stepping into a company called All Data. One would imagine it's a technology company of some kind, database company. Don't know. Back in the 90s, it could be anything. What would you tell us about that decision to step into industry? And what exactly made you take the step?
Yeah. So, I as I already mentioned, I knew that auditing wasn't long-term for me. I was looking for what the right move into industry would be. And something that, I did that I never really thought of. It was no conscious decision, but it's something that's turned into pretty consistent throughout my career. I've always wanted to work at companies that were doing interesting things. I think I've always wanted to be, to me, what the company does is more important than what I do. And that really, has driven everywhere I've ever worked. I've always worked at what I would say are somewhat unique companies. So AllData was a client of the firm. It wasn't one of my clients, but I knew people who had been there, and somebody I knew had left the firm and was working there as well. And so, it just sounded like a really interesting opportunity. So AllData, without going into a lot of detail about almost 40, 30 something year old company, AllData was doing at the time something very unique. So, this is what, 1990, early 90s. They were taking automotive repair information and putting it all on compact discs. But it wasn't just, scanning repair manuals, because the publishers of those manuals were doing that. What AllData was doing was actually writing their own repair procedures. So they had a department, I think it was called the Database Development Department, that was made up of all former mechanics. And they were writing repair procedures and putting them on CDs. And at the time, auto shops didn't have computers in them. So we were selling, custom made hardware with the software systems. And, that way the mechanics could go and see how to do the procedure. It helped with their estimating process. It also would help them with, since you're doing this, look at this. And, we did a bunch of studies. Our, shops are more profitable if they're using our system, and that was part of the sales pitch. And we had shops all over the country using the system. While I was there, they had started moving into a software only process, because, people were starting to get computers more. And this is, the early 90s, and more shops were getting them. And so, it was more profitable, frankly, obviously, to just be in a software subscription business from our perspective. So we started moving that direction. I ended up leaving the company. Just, it's time to move up. It's early in my career, you need to be mobile. And so I moved around, but shortly after I left, they were actually acquired by AutoZone. And I believe AutoZone still sells the AllData product. It's not quite what it was back then. It's evolved over the years, but it's still around.
So we like to sort of highlight the career segues. That's why I ask about that chapter. And the other distinctive segue before, and I should mention, you had, you've been CFO of multiple different biotech firms, just to whet the listener's appetite to know where we're headed. But the other segue that I've been sort of pointing at is, when do you enter the world of biotech? And clearly you've told us that you've always been intrigued. You want a business that's, kind of challenges your mind, I suppose. What can you help us with that chapter? When does that happen?
So actually, it started in high school. So I was in high school, and I really liked biology, and I wanted to take an advanced biology class. And my parents said, no, take an accounting class, because every company has accountants. You'll always have a job. So I took accounting instead of advanced biology. And I actually liked accounting. I excelled at it. And that's, I went down that path. But I always loved science. I just never got to do anything with it, or even learn much about it, other than what I've learned from working in the field now. But so that was the genesis of it. Yeah, I always wanted to be in that field. But then, life, and you start working at different companies, doing interesting things. And around, early 2000s, I was looking to make a career change, and living in the Silicon Valley by that point. And I remember thinking, I was actually working in essentially consumer brand company, but I was thinking, I want to make a change. And I started thinking about different industries to work in. And it just kind of, biotech came back to me that, this is where I really would like to be. It to me is one of the few industries you can work in where you can, do well and do good. And that was important to me. I wanted to be working somewhere that mattered. Not to say other industries don't matter, but to me, this one mattered a lot. I think I felt that I wanted to be working in a field where you can do things that will, improve the human condition. Whether it's save lives, improve lives, but make the world a better place. So it may sound corny, but that's where I wanted to be. And I decided that biotech was probably the best place to be for that, or life sciences in general. And then, the challenge, of course, at that point in my career, I wasn't that young anymore. So it's hard to make a change. I'd never specialized in any industry. I'd worked in a number of different fields. And so, it takes a while to get accepted into an industry where, they want some industry experience. So my first job was at a company called Axon Instruments. And interestingly, I think one of the reasons that worked was because it's a little bit of a hybrid. So they weren't a drug development company. They were in the instrumentation field. So they're making equipment for drug discovery and for a number of other life sciences fields. And so I think, it fit better because, from the accounting and finance standpoint, it was much like everything else I'd been doing in the past. It just happened to be in the science field. So that got me in, and I'll keep going on the segues because they all kind of flow together from this point. So Axon was publicly traded on the Australian Securities Exchange. And so, I learned a little bit about how things work on the ASX, and we ended up selling the company. And in one of those, just complete dumb lucks, a recruiter was looking for a CFO with Australian Stock Exchange experience for a biotech in the Bay Area. Unsurprisingly, I was like the only name that popped up. And so, I ended up joining a company called Biotech. Biotech was a Australian public company. It was based in Australia, but it had, operations in the US. And so started working there. We were developing drugs against hepatitis C and HIV. And I was, at that point, officially in the drug development side of biotech. Biotech had a number of challenges. It was a bit of a turnaround when I joined it. It had roughly 6 weeks cash when I came on board, involved in a number of patent infringement lawsuits. It was, had a lot of challenges it was going through. I like to say I was part of the turnaround, but we didn't quite get it all the way turned around. So eventually, the company, the Australian board decided to shut down all the operations and stop doing any drug development. And they basically focused on being, at the time, just an IP holding company as they try to get, work on their intellectual property estate. At that point, myself and a few others co-founded a company and acquired the hepatitis C asset from Biotech. So we started up our own company, privately held company. And then from there, tried to raise money and get it capitalized, eventually partnered our drug with Pfizer and moved that along. And then eventually sold the company in an ironic twist of fate back to Biotech, who'd survived all of their intellectual property problems. And so we sold the company to them. And then I ultimately ended up at Anixa. The CEO of Anixa was one of my co-founders at the prior company. It was called Tesseri Therapeutics. So he was one of the co-founders when Anixa was kind of reinventing itself as a biotech company. It had been around doing different things over the years. He wanted somebody with biotech experience to come in as CFO. And so been there for about 5.5 years now.
So it seems like you might have given this a little more thought than many people, asking yourself, well, what would interest me? What is it that I want to do? It doesn't have to be a big company. It just has to be a company doing important work. How am I doing? Am I close to how you think your mindset was back then?
That's exactly it. Yeah. I think, it's funny. A lot of people talk about, talk to kids and college and that kind of stuff. And they say the old trite expression, follow your passion. And I don't completely subscribe to that, although I don't think it's wrong either. I think it's good to find something you're good at. It's good to find something you care about. They don't have to be the same thing. So for me, I think my passion is biotech. It's science, but that's not what I do. So for me, I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA. That's what I know how to do. But I follow my passion by taking that skill set into the area that's most interesting to me, that matters to me the most.
I want to also point out that it was the company you founded and you eventually sell back to Biotech or sold to Biotech. It was a 6-year investment there. And now we see that you've made a 6-year investment, I believe, here at Anixa, which brings us up to the business segment of the interview, where just let me ask the question. Tell us about Anixa Biosciences. What is the area of drug discovery Anixa is focused on?
Yeah, so Anixa is a biotech company developing therapies and vaccines focused on, unmet needs in oncology and infectious diseases. So we're listed on the NASDAQ, ticker is ANIX. We've got a unique business model in this industry. We're advancing each of our programs through partnerships with top-notch research institutes. So what we've done, it kind of fits with, my experiences and beliefs about cash and how you manage cash. So we've got a model that basically burns very little cash. Biotech is notorious for burning tons of cash, but what we've done is we've taken the approach of leveraging the infrastructure of our partners. So instead of, building out a massive lab and hiring, a bunch of scientists and physicians and all the equipment that goes along with it and the massive burn that goes along with all that, instead what we do is we work with different research institutes to actually have the work done at their facilities. For example, we've got a couple of programs that we're working on with the Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic, one of the top hospitals in the world. So they're doing all the work for the programs that we own. And so, the kind of people that work at Cleveland Clinic are the kind of people that would never even work outside of academia. We're getting that caliber of scientists working on our programs. We've got another program that's being worked on at the Moffitt Cancer Center. That's down in Tampa. It's one of the top 10 cancer centers in the country. They're doing work on one of our programs there. Again, top-notch people that we could never hire in industry. So this model has allowed us to, with very little capital, advance our programs. Further, we've been able to get, non-dilutive grants and other types of programs. We've got a grant from the DoD. We've got a program with the National Cancer Institute both of these are essentially paying for much of the development work for a couple of our programs. So we like our model because it's a very low burn, capital efficient model, and it's advancing these very important programs to meaningful development milestones. Now, our programs are really important, we feel. And one of the things that we've always felt as we've been growing this company is that we want to work in therapeutic areas that are significant. Our model isn't very conducive for orphan diseases, for example, because, sounds bad, but the payoff for orphan diseases isn't typically huge, right? You're going to invest a lot of money, but the patient population isn't very big. Well, for a company with our type of model, that's different. That's difficult to pull off because, for orphan diseases, a lot of times companies are going to want to have their own, they're going to take the drug all the way through to market. Well, that means developing a sales force, manufacturing, marketing. We don't want to get into all that aspect of growing the company. We want to work with pharmaceutical partners for that. So, we have 2 vaccine programs that are preventative vaccines. One is against breast cancer and one's against ovarian cancer. And, obviously, breast cancer is a huge disease. And we're hopeful that this vaccine that we're working on will actually be a preventative vaccine. So, in theory, every woman in the world could take this vaccine and they would never get breast cancer. Now, of course, nothing's ever that simple. But broad strokes, that's the goal. We're currently in phase 1 clinical trials right now. So we have been dosing patients in this trial. And, we're not yet at a point to disclose any of that data, but it is moving forward and, positively, and we're dose escalation stage. So we're moving forward. Without getting into the science, just to kind of talk a little bit about how it works, because cancer vaccines have not had a good history over the years. People have typically failed in that area. And where ours is a little different is that it's a preventative vaccine. Now, most cancer vaccines have been therapeutic vaccines, meaning you've already got a tumor. Now you take you get immunized, it boosts your immune system to then attack the cancer. The problem is a tumor at that point is trillions of cells, and you're asking your immune system to wipe out this mass. That's a heavy lift for your immune system to do. In our case, as a prevention, we're asking the immune system to destroy, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, small numbers of cancerous cells. So we think we've got a great opportunity. Obviously, a lot of mouse studies have been done, very positive data. And as I mentioned, we're in humans right now. I'd love to go into the science with you, but that's probably not really what we're here to talk about. But it's really interesting how it works. And so, sure.
Could you tell us how old a company is this?
So this is where the story gets kind of fun. So Anixa was founded in the early 1980s. It was an electronics company at the time, and over the years, essentially never quite fulfilled its promise. And so, several years back, our CEO and some other people joined the company and started playing around with a couple different business models, different ideas of how to do something. The board had asked them to come in and help do something new with the company. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, the decision was to move it into the biotech field. And so that's where we are today. So we kind of look at the company and feel like it's a 5 or 6 year old company, even though it's quite a bit older than that.
The fact that it's publicly traded, did it go public back in the earlier chapter?
Yeah, it went public in 1983.
So what does this mean for you in terms of funding and raising money? Would you like to be private? What would you tell us a little bit about the capital structure?
Sure.
And is it quite right?
Yeah. So, it's obviously a company that's been public for, 40 years almost, and has changed business models and industries, gets a little bit of maybe an atypical shareholder base. We're primarily retail shareholders at this point. And, because we didn't go public as a biotech company through an IPO recently, it's not like we've got a bunch of healthcare institutions invested in the company. But, we have a lot of longtime shareholders who are really excited about what we're doing. And, we communicate with them frequently. And, we keep moving the company forward. And, I think there's always challenges when you change industries because, a high-tech investor might have a little different investment profile than a biotech investor. Obviously, timelines are very different. But it's, it is what it is, as they say. We've got a strong shareholder base, a very committed shareholders. Again, it's mostly retail, a few small institutions in there, and we continue to try to grow that institutional base. The market has not helped this last year. The biotech has been really beat up this last year. It got a huge lift at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it's really the air's come out of that quite a bit over the last year. But, we, from a financing perspective, I don't like to take credit because I don't think I was a genius or anybody was. I think, a lot of times it's just serendipity, but we did a financing a little over a year ago when the market was still really good. And, as I mentioned, our business model allows for a very low burn rate. So, we're now sitting on 4 to 5 years worth of cash, which allows us to weather this storm on the market. It's disappointing the stock price isn't better or higher, but at the same time, it's not like we need to go out into the market in the next 4 to 6 months and raise capital. We don't. So hopefully by the time we are looking to raise money, the market will be in a much better place. Potentially by then, we'll have made some advances in our programs, and we could be looking at some non-dilutive deals as well. So a lot more options in the future. And that's what a nice balance sheet does for you, is it buys you the time when the market is down, and hopefully can get you to some meaningful milestones that give you a lot more leverage in the future.
The approach you described, was it clinical trials that these partners, these institutions you mentioned, are helping execute, and that's lowering your costs considerably? Do I have that right?
Yes, so we've done preclinical work with our partners as well. So it's not just the clinical trials; it's preclinical as well, and so that really has kept the cost down dramatically. And again, I mean, frankly, the biggest driver of keeping the cost down has been the grant funding we've received, which has really paid for the bulk of the development of both of our vaccine programs.
And that was within the last 2 years, or when was that?
Yeah. So the breast cancer vaccine, we acquired that intellectual property in middle of 2019, and it came with a grant that was covering all the preclinical work as well as the phase 1 clinical trial costs. The ovarian cancer vaccine, we acquired that about a year and a half ago, and about a year ago, we were able to obtain the funding from the National Cancer Institute to advance that program.
Acquiring this type of IP, is there a certain set of circumstances that this sort of IP purchase happens?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of the above. It depends on a lot of different things. In some cases, you already have a relationship with an institution, and they have some work that one of their researchers is doing. They've got some intellectual property, and they reach out to you and say, "Hey, we think this might fit in well with what you're doing and how you're doing things." And then we look at it. If it looks good to us, then we negotiate a license, and we acquire the rights to that intellectual property. In some cases, we're reading the literature, staying up on what's happening scientifically in different fields, and we see something interesting, and we'll reach out to them and say, "This looks really interesting. Would you consider partnering with us to advance this?" And in some cases, they're open to that. In other cases, they're not. In most cases, they're open to it, but they typically will want a lot more money than will work for our business model. So we're always looking for things that are quote unquote affordable for us to bring in and reasonable for us to bring in. We don't want to acquire a program that then takes away resources from everything else we're trying to do. So we want to make sure it can be, we can afford to bring it in, and we can afford to get it to a meaningful milestone. And there's 100 other ways to obtain intellectual property. Some universities have websites you go to, and you can scan through everything they have that's available for licensing. Some are you kind of have to know who to talk to find out where to get the stuff. But a lot of different ways to skin that, and we're always on the lookout for new things to add to our pipeline.
What are the types of professionals within your organization who's very much involved with that? What would their titles be? What's the nature of
CEO? So we're a very small company, and we all wear a lot of hats. But our CEO is primarily responsible for scouring the landscape for new programs to bring in-house.
Okay, so there's this ecosystem, and again, you folks are based in San Jose, and we've had a few finance leaders from the biotech community there speak with us over time. But I love the notion of your CEO going to conferences, building relationships with the academic institutions, knowing who the people within all the PhDs are in those institutions, having lunch, discussing possibilities. How do we commercialize this? Is this right for your company? Yes, no,
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yep.
Yeah. So we find IP that's interesting to us, and then we'll negotiate the best possible terms we can. The board signs off. We try to structure payment terms as palatable as we can. We try to avoid massive upfront payments, but spread payments out over time, and and then once we get the deal done, then it's full speed ahead on advancing the science.
And again, you arrive with the hope of sort of retooling with new IP and building this, getting this business rolling again. Is that right? Is that,
Yeah. So I think, when we got the company going into biotech, into the drug development business, we knew it's a long haul. It always takes a long time, and it almost always takes longer than even the long time you think it's going to take. It just always ends up that way. We acquired our first drug development asset in, I want to say it was 2017 when we brought in our first drug development asset. We had another, program that was not in the drug development space. It takes time. These are all, early stage programs that we've brought in that, anywhere from 1 to 2 or 3 years before they're ready for clinical trials. And so, we're at a stage now where we have 2 programs in clinical trials. So, for us, that's a huge move forward to be a clinical stage company now. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the breast cancer vaccine that's in clinical trials. And we actually just, a month ago, opened enrollment for an immunotherapy for ovarian cancer. That's being done down at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa. So, having these 2 programs now in the clinic is huge, because what drives everything in this business, especially when you're our stage, is clinical data. Everybody wants to see human data, because before that, mouse data is good. I mean, it's what you've got, but until you know how it's working in people, that's the big question mark. So, human data is huge, and we anticipate that 2022 is going to be a big year. So I don't anticipate it's a revenue year, but it's a very meaningful year for us, because we should be getting some data from both of those trials before the end of the year. And that's going to make a huge difference to, what happens next for the company.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting space to be in. I'm always amazed by the finance leaders in this space. Great expectations, and it's challenging. We know that as well. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment. And Mike, this might have been any time during the course of your career. It might have been back, at Ernst & Young, for all we know. But it was a time where your lines of sight allowed you to see something. And again, those are the lines of sight of a finance person who can see within the organization and see the numbers, that you responded to something. You saw a risk, you saw an opportunity in the numbers. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I don't know if I could say I've ever had one of these, like aha moments. It feels like it's really been a culmination of a lot of different experiences that kind of got me to where I am today. I love this quote. It's the very first CFO I ever worked for. He used to always say, "Cash is king, better than your mother." And that has always stuck with me. Again, like I said before, cash is so important, and that has always stuck with me. I think, what ultimately, I think the thing that has struck me the most is that the mission has to matter. If you're working somewhere that you just don't really care about what the company's doing, nothing matters at that point. I mean, it really just, it's not, as a finance leader, that's great. And you can have a good job and you do the things you want to do, but it feels unfulfilling to me unless the reason I'm doing the finance is for something that's more important. To me, I've been involved in a couple of nonprofits over the years, and, mission is what nonprofits are all about, but for-profit companies are about mission too. Obviously, making money is part of that mission, but, I've always felt that, the financial aspect is a byproduct of a company's mission. What's the company really there for? It's not just there to make money. Some companies maybe are financial companies, but in our case, our mission is to develop drugs to cure cancer, to prevent cancer. I mean, that's our mission. If we're successful at that, everything else falls into place. And so as a CFO, your job is to make sure the company is positioned to fulfill that mission. Because if a company runs out of money before it can fulfill the mission, then that's where you fail. The science may not work. Well, that's not on me. But if we don't have the resources to get there, that's on me. I've seen a number of drug programs over the years at different companies I've been involved with and others I haven't been, where the science was good. Things were great, but money slowed them down. When you see a program sit for a year and a half while you're trying to raise capital, the market moves on. Great example, the company that the hepatitis C program that was at Biotech, that then I started a company up to further develop. Because of all these ups and downs of starting up companies, raising capital, all that, there were in total years where no development happened. And, one of the things that happened is, from a competitive standpoint, hepatitis C got cured while we were trying to raise money to cure it. Those things happen. And so, there's, to me, one of the saddest things in the biotech field is when good science doesn't get there because of finance reasons. If the thing fails because the science just didn't work, hey, that happens, and we learn from it scientifically, and we use that for the next thing. But when things fail because of finances, that's just sad, frankly. There should never be a reason for that. I mean, there are reasons for it, and they're good reasons sometimes. But it's very disappointing. And so I think as a CFO in this industry, your number one goal is to make sure that there's always enough resources to advance those programs.
The business landscape is changing quickly. As the pressure to manage expenses efficiently and strategically increases, you need solutions that not only help drive down costs and improve efficiencies, but meet the changing needs of your business. At U.S. Bank, we can help. We'll work with you to uncover your specific payment challenges and bring you proactive and innovative solutions and strategies that help you meet the financial goals of your organization. Our commitment to doing the right thing for our customers has earned us the designation of one of the world's most ethical companies from the Ethisphere Institute for 6 years in a row. To learn more, visit us at usbpayment.com.
So we're going to step into our mentoring round now, where we get to ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We get to ask you once again to look back as well. And we want you to think about the first time you took on that CFO title so many years back, and think about your first 30 days, your first 90 days as a CFO. If you could go back in time and just give yourself a piece of advice, give that younger self a piece of advice, having just taken on all that responsibility, what would it be?
It would probably be ask more questions. I think, you sometimes you get into that role. You've probably wanted to be in the role for a while. You probably thought you've been qualified for the role much longer. And then you're in the role and you realize you don't always know everything. And frankly, you probably know even less than you thought you knew. And so it's important to ask a lot of questions and not feel like, well, I've got the role now, I have to have all the answers. It's okay to still not know everything. 20 years on, there's still a ton I don't know. And I'm okay with that now. But 20 years ago, I wasn't okay admitting I didn't know everything. And I think that's a really important piece of advice.
Mike, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. And we're trying to have them identify sort of a personal habit or part of a daily routine that kind of is distinctive or sets them apart. It's kind of a hard question because we don't always observe our own habits all that closely, but a family member might have pointed this out to you in the past, or someone who knows you. Anything that you do or a personal habit you have that, and who knows, it might be a routine that's kept you on an even keel over time, kept your head screwed on right. Anything come to mind?
The only habits I know of are ones I've been told are bad habits. So I think, probably, one habit I have is, and I don't know whether it's done any good or not in my finance career, But I enjoy solving puzzles, like crossword puzzles, Sudoku, those kinds of things. I just like doing them. More because the satisfaction of completing them. Frankly, I don't feel like I'm not sure they're doing anything to expand anything in my brain or anything. I love that satisfaction of completion, of solving a problem and completing it. I was never a math whiz, but I did like algebra in school because, again, I like solving the problem. It's what I liked about accounting was, solving problems. And I've always enjoyed getting to solve problems.
Would you have a book recommendation for us?
That's a great question. I don't. I think my only recommendation is that I think people should read stuff outside their area of expertise. I think it's important to read some fiction. It's important to read literature. I think, the key is to be as well-rounded as possible. I think to me, that's really important. I like reading lots of different things just because it opens up my mind to things I hadn't thought about or didn't know much about before.
So we're up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward finally for us. And we would like to know your priorities as CFO of Anixa Biosciences over the next 12 months, though. 12 months looking forward. What are those CFO priorities?
Yeah, I think my top priority, as it always was and always will be, is to ensure that we have adequate capital to execute our business plan. Arguably, we've got 4 or 5 years cash right now, so that shouldn't be a problem. But, we're always open to adding new programs to our pipeline. And so, I think it's always going to be all about making sure we've got adequate capital so that we're not caught flat-footed and not ever in a spot where we have to raise capital in, unfriendly situations.
Mike Catelani, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.